Okay, guys, we're going to continue to beat the dead horse with Bootstrap and cover Bootstrap Nav Bars. And you're going to find out pretty quickly that there are a lot of classes in Bootstrap Nav Bar. And so we're going to begin to get familiar with these. It's worth noting that on the home page of the docs, if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see that some components that we use, and again, here are the components. Some components require, JavaScript to function properly. And so you can kind of see, based on what we've been doing, is that these classes had a lot of pre-written CSS that we're using. And that's a lot of what Bootstrap is we're using pre-written CSS. But some of these components, particularly the Nav Bar, also use pre-written JavaScript. And so these classes also interact with pre-written JavaScript. And here you got this little button to show components requiring JavaScript. And so you see some alerts, some buttons, carousels, drop downs, Nav Bar. There you go. Nav Bar for extending what's called the collapse plugin to implement responsive behavior. Of course, what that's talking about here is this little, what I call cheeseburger menu, right? To get this feature working, you have to properly link to the JavaScript library, which is very easily done using this starter template. Okay, which is just pointing that out, that certain features, certain components need the JavaScript to work. And if for whatever reason you find yourself working on a Bootstrap site and the dropdown isn't dropping down or the nav bar isn't collapsing, like this is the first thing to check that I've seen many times. People are not linking to the JavaScript correctly. And again, that's a simple problem to fix if you use the starter template. So Bootstrap Nav Bar. Read the PR, the marketing. What is it for? Bootstrap's responsive navbar includes support for branding. In other words, getting your company's logo up in the navbar, selling your brand. That's pretty important thing to do right at the top of your website, is get your company's brand on that navbar. Of course, navigation and more. Include support for the collapse plugin. I just demonstrated what that collapse plugin does, as well as what's needed to support it. So as far as what classes are important, right? So let's start taking a look at these classes, because there are a lot. Nav bars require, like a parent, when they say a wrapping nav bar element, it means it wraps other elements inside of it. And so the nav bar, the class of nav bar, is going to be your parent. There's also the class of nav bar expand at a breakpoint. So nav bar expand medium would say that the cheeseburger menu expands out at medium devices and up. So when you see the class of navbar expand and then the breakpoint, well, from that breakpoint up, because it's mobile first, that's how it works, you get mobile responsive collapsing right down into the cheeseburger. And color schemes. You can have blue nav bars and black nav bars and white nav bars and yellow nav bars. You can have all sorts of colors. Nav bars and their contents are fluid by default. So again, the difference between fluid and fixed is fixed width is like 540 pixels wide. It's an absolute measurement. Fluid measurements are just like 100%. It just kind of goes up and down. It's fluid in nature. So nav bars are not fixed. By contrast, they are fluid. Nav bars can be responsive. They can also not be responsive, but in 2022, what the heck? It's going to be responsive. You can also use flex and spacing. So just like we've learned already, that built into Bootstrap, Bootstrap uses Flexbox, margin and padding and all these things, just like everything else in Bootstrap. Okay, so let's take a look at a simple, and this is a static nav bar, meaning it's not really going to collapse. You're going to notice its nav bar expand, basically is always going to be expanded, which is the definition of a static nav bar. It doesn't collapse down. So just looking at the parent. Now first off, we got a nav tag, so we're being semantic, so that's good. We got a nav tag, the class of nav bar, the class of nav bar extend, makes it static, nav bar dark, and BG dark. So BG dark gets you the dark background, and nav bar dark actually gets you the white text. It's like, hey, we got a dark nav bar, and so you need to contrast that darkness with lightness and get white text or gray. It looks gray, basically. Then the first child of our nav tag is an anchor tag, and you can see this is where the branding goes, and this can be text. Now this is a link, so obviously we're going to link you to our home page. You might throw a logo in there as well, so this could be an image logo, but the point is it's a semantic, right? So screen readers know, and for accessibility purposes, that this is the branding of our company. Okay, so the classes so far: nav bar expand, nav bar dark, BG dark. Nav bar brand has a specific purpose. Now we actually get into the navigation portion. Finally, we're getting to the actual links of our nav bar. So our unordered list is going to have a class of nav bar nav. Probably that's going to take the unordered list and get rid of the bullets on it, right? Somewhere in here we're going to have a flex box. Probably on our UL we're going to have a display flex. Our nav item, then our LI, has an anchor tag inside of it. So our nav items themselves are marked with the class of nav item. Active, you'll notice with the active link means that this is the page that you're on. So visually, an end user knows that they're on the home page because it's white and the other three links are gray, right? So just by looking at that nav bar, you know what page you're on by marking that individual item as active, right? Then you got projects, so on and so forth. So here's a simple copy paste. Now I'm just going to get rid of my row. I'm just going to have my container. Right, so here's my container fluid. Here's my nav bar. I think it had like 2 more nav items on it. And what do we have? About and contact. So here, about, this would be about.html, and contact. Right, some root relative pathing. And it's static, so it doesn't matter. It kind of scales up. Again, that's the nav bar expand that's making this a static nav bar. Changing that to a breakpoint level says, okay, nav bar expand medium. By adding a responsive, by changing this to a responsive though, there's some additional markup. Notice there's this new button in here with a whole bunch of classes. Look at all these classes we've used so far. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 10 classes roughly that we used there. Well, where does this button come from? Well, it has to be in the markup somewhere. So here's that button that shows up some of the time, right? When medium devices and up. So we have a button type of button. Now we haven't talked about this tag of button before. I want to say it's like literally next chapter. You would be introduced to this chapter, chapter 12. But it's a clickable button. The class of Nav Bar toggler. The idea is that this will toggle. Sometimes it'll be there, sometimes it won't. There are some attributes: data BS toggle, data BS target, right? And you'll notice that the toggle says is collapse, and the target, though, the target means it needs to match this target ID. You notice it's pound navbar 1. That matches the parent ID that has our unordered list in it. Kind of going back here, there was no parent to our unordered list. However, now our unordered list with our actual navbar in it has a parent div with an ID that matches this navbar 1 ID. I'll tell you, if those don't match, it's just not going to work, right? So the ID here has to match the ID here. And I believe this data attribute is used, like this right here, is used by the JavaScript to, again, to get it to work. So, you know, let's go ahead and first we'll add a couple of things. We're going to add, after our brand, which there's our navbar brand, our anchor. Let's go ahead and paste in that button. Let's format that. Make sure everything came across okay. These area controls, navbar 1, this is used for screen readers and accessibility purposes. And then there's a span navbar toggler icon. This span tag actually gets the button to be drawn. Like that's the in Bootstrap they have their own icons, and this is like a font awesome icon to get the cheeseburger menu, literally what it looks like. Okay, so I'm also going to do the navbar expand medium, right? So I made that change. Make this change on the button. Let's also add this div surrounding our unordered list. So here's our div, and we're going to close that div after the closing unordered list. Let's format it nice and pretty. And there you have a navbar collapsing in small devices and extra small devices. As soon as you hit those medium-sized devices, it pops back up. Okay, now again, if these things don't match, like even just forgetting this pound, because that represents the ID, like I'll take that out, that should break it. See that? No longer functions. And so that data target has to match the ID of this parent of our unordered list. And navbar expand medium, let's say, was it LG for large? And so it breaks a little bit larger devices as opposed to medium. Now we're breaking a large. So on and so forth. So that's your navbar. I will tell you, the main things I've seen this cause this not to work. I mean, kind of coming back to this outer nav, just getting something like this, navbar dark, BG dark. Like let's just take the navbar dark off. Just getting like the basic colors to work on this navbar, right? So navbar dark gets that white font text color. So you want a good contrasting text color. And so let's look at the docs and kind of pick up from there. So under components, we've got Nav Bar. And let's look at our color schemes. So this first Nav Bar is kind of like what we have. Nav Bar Dark. Say that 10 times fast. Nav Bar Dark. Nav Bar Dark. BG Dark. Nav Bar Dark. BG Primary. So again, Nav Bar Dark gets you the font color. BG is your background color of blue. This is a class of Nav Bar, and we just did Nav Bar Light. So we're saying, hey, it's a light Nav Bar, so have a dark font. And they actually gave an inline style for the background color of this light blue. So those are your, these are the common color schemes. Nav Bar Dark, background color, Nav Bar Light, again affecting the text color. And then built into Bootstrap, we got some BG colors, and you're familiar with those from yesterday, or your own custom CSS. All right, so a brand logo. So here we got the parent nav tag Nav Bar Expand Medium, Nav Bar Dark, BG Dark. Got it. Our first child is our anchor with our Nav Bar brand. We're changing this anchor tag to say display flex, align item center. What do we have inside of this anchor tag? We have an image, so we have an image link and the company name. So because this is displaying flex, that's going to get these two, the image and the span, in a row instead of on top of one another. And align items center is going to be that vertical centering that we have going on. So an anchor tag, inside the anchor tag we have an image and a span. Let's see if I can hotkey that. So here's our Nav Bar. Well, what do we have here? An image and a span. And we've also said deflex and align item center. Nav Bar brand, deflex, align item center. The image, we're saying to display inline block, margin on the end, which is on the right hand side, 2. So we're adding some margin after the image. So let's go ahead and put the Rankin logo in there since we've got that ready to go. Images, Rankin red, Rankin.
Use a Rankin red small. I guess that would never matter.
Yeah, we can use a smaller one. Rankin red small. And okay, so this is what we've got going on right now. Now, again, we can kind of, where's all this? Deflex and align item center. Let's just take that out. We don't exactly get it centered up. Actually, it looks a little bit, off center right now. I mean, it's. Let's bring that back in.
I got a question.
Yeah, what's up?
How did you get, like, where it says home, projects, about, contact? When I did it, mine would go all the way to the right. How did you get it to, like, go to the left or like center it?
So it should be by default left aligned. And so probably what I'm going to look at, Vinny, in your case, and I can look specifically at your code, but that's this div section right here of div and ID of Nav Bar 1. And I would just make sure that my classes, I don't have any typos like on the, because the challenging part on a lot of this is like not making little typos in your class names. That's gonna be my first place that I would look, Vinny, is I would make sure that, and a lot of times what I'll do is I'll click on a div, and for example, this is a class of Navbar collapse and collapse. So I'm gonna come over here and make sure that the class of Navbar collapse is being applied. So like align item center is being applied. But I think the short answer, Vinny, is it should default to the left. I'm not sure how it ended up on the right, but probably it's just a typo in one of the classes. But I can take a closer look. Let's add these classes to the image. Display inline block and ME2. Well, ME2 is going to be pretty obviously moving the text off of the image. So up here on our image, let's add the class display inline block margin N2. I really don't know that D inline block is necessary. Yeah, but that's just margin. We already hit on color schemes, so we hit that up in the docs. And that's, that's the gist. That's the gist of a nav bar. There's a fair amount of classes here. You got a nav bar parent. You can have the branding opportunity. You've got the unordered list. You've got this button that's going to toggle visible, depending on when your breakpoint tells it to expand. That is the PowerPoint. Let's hit the docs one more time, make sure we didn't miss anything. Now there's a lot going on the Navbar docs, I'll tell you that. If I'm
I actually have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
With the active property, does that operate like as a Boolean? If it's active, it shows it. If not,
Yeah, so like, you would typically just do it on one, but let's add the active to the anchor. Is it on the anchor tag or is it on the LI? It might be on the LI. Nope. Okay, I put it on the anchor tag. It worked. So I put it on the projects, and you could see that projects is just. So on the home page, you would make the home the active link. On the projects page, you would make projects the active link. On about, you would make about the active link. You're also going to notice you get a little hover effect there. But yes, it is like Boolean, true or false. Now, interesting. Check that out. So I put it on the anchor tag, and that lit up projects. Notice how on the PowerPoint I had it on the LI, and it didn't like that. Let's put that on the anchor, and then it works. So that might be a mistake in the PowerPoint, right? Did you notice if I take the active off of the anchor tag put it back on the LI, we actually don't get that to work. Which I think, intuitively, at least to me, it makes sense to put it on the anchor tag, because that's what your that's what the link.
I figured out the issue, Mr. G.
Yeah, what'd you find?
I had my div class container fluid underneath my nav class, which it needed to go before it.
You said the div class. Oh, your container
That was
was
underneath
inside the nav, not outside the nav.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I think it's important, to understand just some of these basics of the nav bar, like what are the main classes that you use, what is this button that's kind of hanging out in here, like what is this, and how does this link to that, and it all ties together. It's easy to kind of come into components and say, oh, I need a nav bar, so let me just copy this and paste it. But I think there's a lot of value to understanding the pieces inside of that as opposed to just copying and pasting code. And those advantages specifically are controlling, exactly what you want out of this nav bar, not just starting from a template. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop the nav bar discussion.